Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world, one character at a time. And it all comes down to one thing: a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. Well, this is a short series on the elements that go into writing with emotion. This little podcast series is especially beneficial for anyone who has ordered my book, Writing with Emotion, because this series goes into the concepts that are fundamental to understanding this book. It's sort of like a prelude to reading this book, but it's also standalone because it is prelude and does not duplicate the material in the book. It stands alone as an introduction to how can you handle emotions in a story, assuming that you're not going to go about doing so purely descriptively, like describing slumped shoulders or a downcast mouth. We aren't talking about that level of emotions here. We are talking about conveying emotion, demonstrating, showing your reader how your character is feeling, not by observational externals, but by a deep understanding of what's going on in the motivation of your character. What's going on in his head? What's the decision process like? It's far deeper than anything descriptive. It's far more powerful because it also lets your reader react to the same predicament in his own way. And if I want to give you an example to get us going today of the idea of reacting to a predicament in more than one way. If you have a character who's extremely ambitious and wants a public speaking career, if that individual was suddenly told that the speaker was going to be delayed by 30 minutes and he would be asked to step up on stage and speak to the audience and fill in some of that time, why, that character would be delighted. It would be a great opportunity. Yet if you had another character, the idea of handing them a microphone and stand up on stage in front of hundreds of people would be reason enough to run for cover. Same situation, same circumstances. Here's a microphone. There's all the people. Go talk. If you just present it in the circumstances, then your reader will respond with, or, ooh. And then they read how the character reacts. But the process of first setting themselves up with their own emotions will give them deeper buy-in to your story. They'll stop and say, oh, why was that character eager to speak? Or, oh, why did he run away? And that will get more engagement with your story. It will help your reader enjoy your story more, feel that they've spent their time more wisely reading your story. So that's why we want to go into the emotions at a very deep level. In fact, there's almost no amount of depth that would be not worth studying. But what we're going to study right now is just the principles behind it. And specifically, we're winding up this session with our talk about the voices. And a speedy review, we say that when we're talking about emotions and understanding what's going on in your character's head, there are three possible voices, and they do not necessarily all show up. The three voices are the voice of the struggle, which usually comes off as even keel, rational, calmly A, B decision making. The voice of loss, which often sounds like a put down. Ooh, you'll never be able to do that, man. And then the voice of victory, that's the opposite. You can do it. Yeah, come on, look, it's not that hard. So those three voices in combination are what your character hears when he's trying to make a decision. If you think about it, if you're consciously pondering a decision that you need to make, you probably have heard all three of those voices going on in your own head, because that's what happens when we make a conscious decision. Well, we covered cases earlier where all three voices were present. We looked at a case where the victory voice dropped out and we were left with just loss and struggle. And we looked at a case where the loss voice dropped out and we were left with victory and struggle. Well, today we're going to let the struggle voice drop out and see what we get when we take those character traits to that ultimate position where there's only a voice of victory or only a voice of loss. Because they are so similar and they're polar opposites of each other, we're going to go ahead and cover them in one episode, in part because you've done this 3 times previously. You've got the hang of what these cards look like, how we're going to look at it and understand it, and these are such direct opposites that we can safely cover them both together. You won't confuse them because they're opposites, and we can study them efficiently because other than their opposite nature, they're structured the same. So come on over to the down-facing camera and let's take a look at our last 2 positions on the character profile diagram. And afterwards, we'll do a quick review of the vocabulary that you should have down by now at this point in the series. So come on over to the down-facing camera and we'll keep going. Okay, now our first avenue that we're going to study is when only the voice of victory is present. When only the voice of victory is present, we're going to call these base traits. Let's see why. When the character is so accustomed to following the voice of victory that it is the only voice remaining, then it's the only likely path the character will follow. It's the only voice he hears, the only thing he's likely to do. These traits form part of your character's very being, and that's why we call them base traits. The character acts just because that's the way he is. We'll continue to have the pair of terms that we've been seeing all along. We'll have base traits, and we'll also have a base position. Base trait and base position mean just about the same thing. When we're talking about the character, when our focus is on our character himself, then we'll talk about a base trait. When we're focusing on the character profile diagram where we capture our characters, all of the character traits of our character on one index card, which we call the character profile diagram, then we'll talk about the base position. And so we can simply say that a base trait can be found in the base position on the character profile diagram. So let's take a look at where you'll see it here. It's the base position on the character profile diagram. So for base traits, the voice of victory almost always wins, and we draw the base traits as a straight line down from the center position. If you're using our stick figure version of the character profile diagram, it'll be the bottom of the starburst. If you're using our fancy wheel version, then it will be the pink line straight down, ending in the letter G. So to summarize, when only the voice of victory is present, we have a base trait. We also talk about base position and use the terms about the same. And when we're dealing with base traits, the voice of victory almost always wins. Now let's look at the opposite form of a single voice. When only the voice of loss is present, we have the pinnacle traits. When only the voice of loss can be heard, then the character will almost certainly follow the voice of loss. What other voice does it have to follow? We call these traits the pinnacle traits because they are so far over your character's head that they might as well be on the pinnacle of a mountain. Again, we're going to have 2 terms, pinnacle trait and pinnacle position, and we'll refer to the pinnacle trait when we're talking about our character, and the pinnacle position when we're talking about the character profile diagram. This diagram or this, they're the same thing, 2 versions. So a pinnacle trait, we say, is in the pinnacle position on the character profile diagram. And here's what it would look like. Suppose we had respect as a pinnacle trait. Then it would be at the very tippy top of our character profile diagram in stick form. If we were doing it drawn out in the big fancy circle, it would be this orange bar upward ending in the letter H, and we would put it right there. To do a quick summary of this, when only the voice of loss is present, we call it a pinnacle trait. The pinnacle trait and the pinnacle position mean much the same thing, and for a pinnacle trait, the voice of loss almost always wins. So let's see how far we've come in our deep analysis of the preconditions for writing with emotion. We began with the concept that the voices in your character's head reveal his power to decide. And now we've seen how that breaks down, don't we? Because he's going to have to choose amongst the voices that are available. The voices in our head reveal how accessible the struggle is to our character, to his ability to make a choice. And knowing how much power your character has over his choice is very enlightening. So let's review all of the options we have. So we say that the 3 voices either help, hinder, or cause the character to ponder. Help are the victory, hinder are the loss, and ponder are the struggle. And here are all of the character voices that we discovered, all of the voices that could be present to help govern and decide, help our character decide what he's going to do. Clearly, when all three voices are present, the character has the best chance of making a free decision. Why is that? It's because he can hear all three. He can hear the reason, he can hear the downplay, he can hear the upbeat. He can hear all three voices together, so he should theoretically be fairly free to make a decision. We call those the rudder traits because that's how your story is steered. It's by the choices that your character makes out of the rudder position. Then we looked at when only struggle and victory are present, the character is not anywhere near as capable of making a chaotic or a harmful or a choice that's going to lead to loss. It's not nearly as likely because only the two voices of struggle and victory are present. Similarly, when only the two voices of struggle and loss are present, it's very hard for your character to make a choice for victory. He simply doesn't have that voice around to help in that choice. And then we took it even further and we took away the voice of struggle. And when only the voice of victory remains, well, then that's just the way the character is going to be. And we call that a base trait. Or if only the voice of loss is present, well, that chaotic mess is just the way the character is going to be. And we call that the pinnacle position. So I hope you see in this review that's really only one area, the rudder trait, where the character has a complete free choice of what they're going to do. So if we take a look at the whole curriculum that we set out for ourselves in the mini-series, we can now see that our whole goal is to understand how emotions make memories, how we can understand their behavior well because they do make memories. This is our reason why we want to study them, so that we can write with emotions so that our readers will remember what we write forever, and we need to understand them well in order to do that. First, we studied the only way that you can make any sense out of emotions is through the struggle. And we know this because we saw psychologists throwing up their hands and saying we can't make sense out of them. And we saw biologists throwing up their hands and saying we can't really make sense of them. But we can as fiction writers because we get to play a little bit more tightly with our world. We get to invent our own world a little bit here. And so we can focus only on the struggle, whereas of course in the real world things get very, very complex very fast. But given our ability as fiction writers to only focus on the struggle, we have the ability to help our reader sharpen their focus and understand where that voice of struggle plays a role in their lives. And that's largely part of why we like to write our books as fiction writers, because we want to make the world a better place. So we've covered now these first two parts of understanding emotions, and we are ready to make a big shift going into tomorrow, where we talk about how plot is driven by changes in emotional profile. And we'll be launching into that section tomorrow. But hang with me for a moment as we can wrap this up, because you still need to get your writing tip for the day. Okay, so now I promised you a review of the vocabulary that you should have down by now. Because when some people start reading the book Writing with Emotion, one more shameless plug, you can get it at KathleenSpracklin.com. The first thing that people find sometimes is that they're hit with a flood of vocabulary words. So that's one of the reasons for this preamble to the book, is so that those words won't throw you for a loop. So the first word we met was struggle, because we learned that the only way to organize emotions was by understanding struggle. The second word that we focused on was voice, because the voice is how the struggle is expressed. In fact, one of the voices that we studied is the voice of struggle. The voice of struggle weighs the options. The second type of voice was the voice of loss, and the third type of voice was the voice of victory. So now we have struggle, loss, victory. A fairly small number of words. And voice. Struggle, voice, loss, and victory. Now we had gained an additional set of words based on how many of the voices were present. When all three were present, we said we had the rudder traits that steer the ship. That's a new word, rudder trait. Then we said that when everything was solid and the right decision was routinely being made, we had our anchor traits. And that was where just the voice of struggle and victory were present. Anchor is one of our key words. We looked at the voices that were all flighty because only the voices of struggle and loss were present. And we called those the wing traits. Wing is one of your keywords. Then today we added the last two in this group. We talked about traits when it was just so solid that it was part of the character's being, and we called those the base traits. And the other type, so base is one of your important words. And the other type that we studied where the character trait was so far over your character's head that he couldn't even get a hold of it, and we called those the pinnacle traits. So pinnacle was one of your keywords. So here we are. We have struggle, voice, loss, victory, rudder, anchor, wing, base, pinnacle. That's it. Those are the key words that you need to have coming into the book, Writing with Emotion, to make it make sense. Then we also saw something that's very, very handy, and that's the character profile diagram, because with this little design, we can store an entire personality profile for a character on a single file card. That's where the Zettelkasten comes in. The other place the Zettelkasten comes in are all these cards with all their card numbers. I hope you've been watching if you're one of my Zettelkasten people. So now, what is your writing tip today from your base trait and from your pinnacle trait? And your writing tip for those two positions are that they're the launch point for a long-form character arc. The whole phrase. But we really are going to only look at 3 words. Arc of emotion. And we're going to start talking about that tomorrow. So your pro writing tip for today is that your base and your pinnacle positions are the starting point for a character trait when you want to do a long form novel that shows your character undergoing a deep character change. If your novel is going to be one of those novels where the character falls apart and turns into mush before your very eyes, then you're going to start out with that trait in the base position. You're going to show how he messes up with it, and it ends up in first moving from the anchor and then moving to the rudder, finally becoming all flighty and wingy, and eventually just being out of his reach, and the character crumbles. It's the long form star arc of destruction. On the other hand, if you want to see the long form arc of victory, then you'll start with the character trait in the pinnacle position. You'll show it moving first to the wing position and then to the rudder position, next to the anchor position, and finally being part of the base position. So it's that movement of a character, of a given character trait, out of the pinnacle into the base, or out of the base into the pinnacle, that is the emotional arc that will make a long form novel satisfying to a reader. And not only that, we're going to look into it a little bit more starting tomorrow so that you can have a little bit of flesh to put on it other than just that brief statement. So you won't want to miss these next few episodes. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.